vision or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition, dates December 20th through 21st, 2025, on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trees Tell Holiday Spending Story by Justin Lahart. If Christmas tree sales are anything to go by, U.S. consumers aren't pulling the plug on holiday shopping this year, but they might be dimming the lights. Heading into the holiday season, Tim Layden, who owns Big John's Layden's Tree Farm in West Greenwich, Rhode Island, thought he was going to have a great year. There aren't as many Christmas tree farms in the state as there used to be, and he reckoned that would bolster his numbers. Instead, his business has been down a bit, and he thinks it's because people are feeling pinched. With less competition, I thought we would be up 10-20% this year, he said. I think there is an impact from the economy on people. Affordability is a real thing. Layden said he is also seeing signs of a bifurcated economy, with well-off consumers still spending freely. The trees measuring 8 to 10 feet and higher that he sells for $100 did as well this year as last, but the 6 to 8 foot ones that cost $75 and that make up the bulk of the tree he sells did worse, and the extras that people load up on when they are feeling flush, such as wreaths and garlands and baskets, haven't sold well at all. Over the years, Christmas tree sales have been a decent indicator of how overall consumer spending is doing, according to Oscar Slaughterbeck of Evercore ISI. Slaughterbeck has been surveying regional Christmas tree sellers since 2003, an idea that came from a Colorado-based client whose family owned a big tree farm. This year, the Christmas tree survey suggests sales aren't very good, running just 3% above last year's levels over the 3 weekends since Thanksgiving. Last year, sales rose 7%. Cold weather has been an issue in some places, and some sellers have said that customers are more carefully watching how much they spend this year. The survey could give some clues on the state of holiday spending, for which we don't yet have much data. The government's November retail sales report, which encompasses the busy Thanksgiving weekend, typically provides a key reading on the health of the holiday spending, but its release was delayed because of the government shutdown, and it has yet to be rescheduled. Alternative data sources have so far revealed a mixed picture. Adobe reported that online sales were up strongly the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, for example, but an analysis of bank customer data conducted by the Bank of America Institute suggested sales growth tapered off toward the end of November. The artificial tree business this year hasn't been so hot either, said Mark Harmon, chief executive of Balsam Brands, a Redwood City, California-based tree company that sells artificial trees, holiday decor, and lights. The goods Harmon sells are mostly made in China and other Asian countries and subject to high tariffs. The company stepped up imports before tariffs kicked in April, and after that was able to get its suppliers to share some of the burden. Even so, Balsam cut back on orders and laid off about 10% of its staff. It also raised prices by 10% and up, depending on the product. Harmon said his price checks indicated competitors are following suit. Like Layden, Harmon is seeing a divide between the spending habits of high-end shoppers and everyone else. The market for expensive artificial trees, balsams run into the thousands of dollars, has been good. But overall, sales are down, with more shoppers switching to smaller trees compared with last year. Balsam's U.S. business also contrasts it with its businesses in Canada, the UK, France, Germany, and Australia, where sales are up strongly from last year, according to Harmon. The difference is that in the U.S., the consumer, I believe, is concerned about the economy and more hesitant. Some tree sellers are reporting brisker sales. We have a lot of regular customers, and we had new ones this year too, and nobody really seemed like they were hesitant about spending, said Joe Sanfilippo, owner of Sanfilippo Christmas Tree Farm in New Berlin, Wisconsin. At Francisco Farms in Staunton, Virginia, owner Bill Francisco said that tree sales were fine and that he sold out of wreaths and garlands. Chad McCormick, who owns CM Farms in West Point, Mississippi, said sales were a bit better this year than last, but not as good as they were in the past. Customers seem more price conscious, calling to ask him not just whether he has trees for sale, but how much they cost. On a Facebook group of tree sellers he's on, somebody recently asked how business was going, and the answers were varied. Sales were up, sales were down, sales were steady, he said. But as a general conception of what I saw there, sales were down this year. Focus of anxiety could shift to jobs, by Greg Ip. President Trump is clearly frustrated by all the talk of an affordability crisis. I don't blame him. As Thursday admittedly distorted consumer price index report showed, inflation simply isn't behaving badly. But don't define affordability too narrowly. It means not just the prices we pay, but the means to pay them. We may be focusing too much on the first and not enough on the second. The inflation report was part of a deluge of data this week, with a delay caused by the government shutdown. It also showed unemployment rising to a 4-year high of 4.6% in November and earnings growth slowing. Sometimes unemployment rises because a recession is underway. This time, something else is going on. Business leaders I have talked to in recent months are broadly optimistic about growth and pessimistic about hiring, especially their own. As their attitudes percolate down, we could see job security supplant prices in the public's hierarchy of anxiety. Prices rose a lot after the pandemic and haven't broadly fallen since Trump took office, his promises to the contrary notwithstanding. But they are rising pretty slowly. Thursday's reports showed the inflation rate fell to 2.7% in November, the lowest since July, while core inflation, which excludes food and energy, fell to its lowest since 2021. That report almost certainly understated inflation because of workarounds by the Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics in response to the shutdown. Nonetheless, based on the data, you can't argue inflation has gotten worse under Trump. Odds are that in the coming year it will get better. Trump is clearly frustrated that the public hasn't rewarded him for a pretty good economy, just as Joe Biden was a year ago when growth, unemployment, inflation were broadly similar. That is because economic anxiety is holistic. People have a nagging feeling that the economy isn't working for them. That has shown up as anger at the high price of groceries, then the shortage of housing, and now health insurance. But part of the equation is the security of your income, and that is where the job market comes in. Unemployment rise has been gradual and the level is still moderate, yet fragility is amply evident. The number of people working part-time who wanted to work more is now up 23% from a year earlier. Those unemployed for more than half a year rose to 1.9 million from 1.8 million in September and 1.65 million a year earlier. It may not be a recession, but for anyone trying to find a job, it is starting to feel recession-like. Meanwhile, average hourly earnings in November were up just 3.5% from a year earlier, the lowest since 2019 if pandemic-distorted figures are excluded. Other data do show firmer growth. But with employers reluctant to hire and unemployment growing, the pressure on wages is likely downward. The question is why? Economic growth has topped 3% in the second and third quarter, according to the latest estimates. Profits are strong, and the stock market is near record highs. The labor market is usually closely linked to the pulse of the overall economy. Yet in its latest survey, the Business Roundtable finds that more chief executives plan to cut than add jobs for the third straight quarter, the lowest three-quarter reading since the 2007 through 2009 recession. One reason for the disconnect between the job market and the broader economy is tariffs. Economists expected them to show up as rising prices for imports. In real life, though, inputs don't always map neatly to outputs. To cope with higher costs, whether for tariffs, energy, taxes, or health insurance, a business owner looks at all options, which may mean trimming headcount instead of raising prices. Maybe it isn't a coincidence, payroll growth stepped down sharply in the spring, just as Trump's biggest tariff increases took effect, while the effect on inflation has been muted. If so, relief is on the way. Tariff rates have stabilized and may actually drop if the Supreme Court rules against some in the coming weeks. Yet even if the tariff effect fades, other headwinds remain, mostly artificial intelligence. In 3 years, this has gone from being a novelty party gag to being embedded in all your hiring plans and production, Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller told executives at an event hosted by Yale University's School of Management on Wednesday. The speed at which jobs are going away is what's frightening, and we are not able to see the jobs that are coming, although they will come. Trump has locked arms with the AI industry. Politically, that could be a liability. Surveys by the Edelman Trust Institute find users in the U.S. are twice as likely to say they reject as embrace the growing use of AI. The conventional wisdom in Washington is that costs will be the dominant issue heading into next fall's midterm elections. The latest trends on AI and job security hint that the conventional wisdom may have to change. Stefanik quits race for New York governor by Anvi Bhutani. Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York State, a close ally of President Trump, who rose to prominence as a critic of Ivy League leaders, said she would drop out of the race for New York governor and wouldn't seek re-election to the House. While spending precious time with my family this Christmas season, I have made the decision to suspend my campaign for governor and will not seek re-election to Congress, she said in a statement. I did not come to this decision lightly for our family, she said, citing her desire to spend more time with her young son. Stefanik, who came to Congress in 2015, has had a series of political setbacks this year, culminating in her announcement Friday. She was the top-ranking woman in GOP leadership when she was nominated by Trump to be U.S. ambassador to the United Nations after he was elected to his second term. Her nomination was scratched after Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican from Louisiana, grew concerned about the thin Republican majority in the House, with the concern reaching a peak during special elections in Florida. Stefanik stayed in Congress and with a lesser leadership title became because her past post had been filled. Stefanik announced her run for governor 6 weeks ago and struggled to gain traction in a state that usually leans blue. Governor Kathy Hochul, the Democratic incumbent, had a 19-point lead over Stefanik, according to a Siena University poll released this month. Stefanik publicly criticized Johnson in a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, calling him an ineffective leader who is losing control over the GOP conference headed into the midterm elections. More drug makers reach deals will cut prices, by Peter Loftus. 9 pharmaceutical companies, including Bristol Myers Squibb, GSK, and Merck, agreed to lower the prices that certain federal government programs and patients pay in a new round of industry pacts with the Trump administration. The companies said they would reduce U.S. prices on drugs to levels comparable with prices charged in other wealthy countries, which are generally much lower. In return, the companies get administrative-backed reprieves from the potential new U.S. tariffs for 3 years. President Trump announced the deals Friday at the White House, joined by top executives of 9 companies. Shares in the companies were up on the news. Starting next year, American drug prices will come down fast and furious and will soon be among the lowest in the developed world, Trump said. The agreements follow similar drug pricing deals between the Trump administration and 5 drug makers, including Pfizer and AstraZeneca. Drug makers Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk agreed to cut prices for popular weight loss drugs. The companies reached the new agreements unveiled Friday are Amgen, Boehringer Ingelheim, Roche's Genentech unit, Gilead, Novartis, and Sanofi, in addition to Bristol Myers, Merck, and GSK. Trump, who has been seeking to show his administration is trying to help Americans concerned with affordability, has described the deals as helping to lower drug prices. For the companies, the deals secure protection from onerous tariffs and provide more certainty about U.S. drug pricing policy. Some companies have said the lower prices will hurt revenue slightly, though they had already been offering big discounts to the Medicaid program. Under the terms, The, quote, most favored nation prices offered by companies would apply to the U.S. Medicaid program for lower income patients, direct-to-patient services, including the planned TrumpRx.gov, and to newly launched drugs in the future. Merck said it would make diabetes drugs Januvia and Janmet available to eligible American patients at a cash price that is 70% off the current list price through a direct-to-patient program. Amgen said it would sell its migraine drug Amavig for $299 a month, nearly 60% off the list price. Some of the complaints in the new round of deals also agreed to donate the main ingredients for certain medicines to a national stockpile to be available in the event of a national emergency. GSK is donating 6 months' supply of a respiratory inhaler, and Bristol Myers will donate 6 months' worth of the blood thinner Eliquis. Bristol Myers said it would provide Eliquis free to Medicaid programs. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. How the Brown shooter evaded police. An intense manhunt ended in a New Hampshire storage unit days later, by Jack Morfitt. For several tense days, nobody knew who or where the Brown University shooter was. He'd walked into a classroom Saturday and shot 10 students, killing 2 in a seemingly random act of violence that shook Providence to its core. Then he disappeared. In the first rush of news from December 14th mass shooting, Rhode Island and the federal law enforcement urged witnesses to come forward. They pressed for home surveillance footage, combed the city for leads and suspects, and within 24 hours revealed they detained a person of interest, and just as quickly backtracked. Progress was slow, law enforcement said, in increasingly terse press conferences. They had no significant leads to share. The gunman had left a fatal clue about his whereabouts Monday night, but police didn't grasp it. An MIT professor had been shot in his Massachusetts home in what police initially said was an unrelated incident. By the time police made the connection, suspect Claudio Neves Valente was already dead. Neves Valente, 48, a Portuguese national who briefly attended Brown more than 2 decades ago, managed to commit 2 deadly shootings and avoid police capture over 5 days by what appears to have been careful planning, according to criminal affidavits. The one-time physics student, who wore a mask during the Brown shooting, swapped license plates to throw police off his trail as he moved across 3 states, law enforcement said. He had multiple weapons with him, but it's not yet known where he obtained them or how he got them, or his exact movements after the shootings. There are many questions that need to be answered, Special Agent in charge of FBI Boston, Ted Dox said. When Neves Valente burst into a classroom in Brown's Barris Holly building, he had a pistol with a green laser sight, witnesses told police. He opened fire, authorities said, killing sophomore Ella Cook and freshman Mohammed Aziz Ermazakov. All police initially had to go on were spent 9mm shell casings and the DNA on them, and ammunition magazines left at the scene. The DNA turned up no hits in any law enforcement databases. There were no cameras in the auditorium itself or in the hallways leading to it, and the 2 cameras outside didn't capture all the exits, the affidavit said. The best footage of Neves Valente leaving the campus came from the dashcam of a Brown shuttle bus. When police showed photos from the surveillance footage to hospitalized victims who got a good look at the shooter, one, quote, quickly froze, physically pushed back, and became emotional, end quote. And another, quote, took a deep breath, shut his eyes, changed his breathing pattern, end quote, the affidavit said. Both confirmed the photo was the shooter, but the police still haven't a name. Police publicly released a blurry snapshot of a rotund man in a dark jacket and hat, and the surveillance footage sparking a flood of online speculation. Hidden in the chatter, however, was a detail that really broke the case open, according to Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nerona. The police need to look into a gray Nissan with Florida plates, possibly a rental, a Reddit user had written. It launched police on a new hunt, this time for the mystery poster. Police believed he could be the man they'd seen on the surveillance footage getting close to the suspect on the day of the shooting. They released a still of that person asking them to come forward and help with the investigation. Within an hour, John, the mystery poster and Brown University graduate, was with the police. He told them he'd locked eyes with Neves Valente inside a bathroom of the Barris Holly building before the shooting. The pair played a game of cat and mouse on foot through the neighborhood. Armed with John's tip, law enforcement traced the car back to an Alamo rental office in Boston. On Wednesday, police finally got what they most needed, a name. Neves Valente rented the car on December 1st with a Florida driver's license, records showed, and with the name came a new surprise. The day after the Brown shooting, Neves Valente logged into his email account from the suburbs of Boston, just half a mile from where MIT physics professor Nuno Loureiro, also from Portugal, was shot and killed. Surveillance footage captured a gray Nissan Sentra, like the one Neves Valente rented a mile from Loureiro's home in Brookline, Massachusetts, but this time with an unregistered Maine license plate over the Florida plate. Loureiro and Neves Valente studied at the same institute in Portugal between 1995 and 2000. They knew each other, police said. While 9mm bullet shell casings were found at both shootings, ballistics evidence suggests they were not shot from the same gun. Nevertheless, the FBI has alleged Neves Valente rented a car in Boston, which he drove to Providence, Rhode Island, to commit the mass shooting at Brown, and then drove back to Boston to shoot and kill Loureiro. Through financial records, police unearthed a storage unit in Salem, New Hampshire, that he'd rented. That's where an FBI SWAT team found him dead on Thursday night. A mask, clothing, and a satchel seen in surveillance footage from Providence was found in his car parked outside. Police haven't disclosed possible motives or said what they know of how Neves Valente spent the 24 hours after the Brown shooting and the days after Loureiro's murder. Kirk's death ignites free speech debate. Battle within the MAGA movement was on display at Turning Point event by Aaron Zitner and Eliza Collins, Phoenix. Charlie Kirk built Turning Point USA into one of the nation's most powerful political groups on his belief in open debate. His Prove Me Wrong events, the invitation to take all comers and dialogues he set up on college campuses, often went viral online and drew thousands of young voters to the conservative cause. Now, 3 months after Kirk was shot and killed at one of these events, his commitment to open debate is at the center of a bitter fight within the MAGA movement over the rise of anti-Semitic ideas and conspiracy theories. On Thursday, that fight was on display at the biggest annual event of Kirk's own group, in front of 31,000 of its most enthusiastic supporters. Ben Shapiro, a popular podcaster, kicked off the annual Turning Point conference with an attack on Tucker Carlson, one of the online right's biggest media stars, for conducting what Shapiro said were softball interviews on his podcast with several fringe figures, including Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist and Holocaust denier. There is a reason Charlie Kirk despised Nick Fuentes. He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll, and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility, and that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did, Shapiro said. He built Nick Fuentes up, and he ought to take responsibility for it. Fuentes didn't respond to requests for comment. Shapiro said that allowing Fuentes to speak came with the responsibility of challenging his views, but that Carlson had instead praised him. Carlson, the evening's keynote speaker, answered that it was Shapiro who betrayed Kirk's principles. To hear calls for, deplatforming and denouncing people at a Charlie Kirk event, I'm like, what? This is hilarious, Carlson said. He said that Charlie stood firm in his often stated and deeply held belief that people should be able to debate. Carlson, late October, interview with Fuentes had riled much of the MAGA movement and the Republican Party for weeks, but many in the audience said it was jarring to see the discord play out on stage at the Turning Point conference, which has become one of the premier gatherings on the conservative calendar. President Trump spoke at it last year, and Vice President J.D. Vance will address the conference on Sunday. The debate has forced many in the party to pick sides. Trump last month defended Carlson, saying that you can't tell him who to interview. At the Heritage Foundation, a central player in the conservative policymaking, a board member, and several researchers quit soon after the think tank's president defended Carlson. The Heritage president, Kevin D. Roberts, later said his defense of Carlson was a mistake. The dispute has created a clash between two conservative ideals. Many in the party say that Democratic cancel culture and what they perceive as censorship by big tech companies has made them wary of limiting free speech rights. Others say that party leaders have always shunned voices that undermine its values, citing its opposition in past decades to David Duke and other white supremacists. It's a challenging question, said Andrew Cedra, a pastor from Sydney, Australia, who appeared several times on Kirk's podcast and was at the Turning Point conference. He believes Carlson showed a lack of moral courage in failing to challenge Fuentes on the podcast, but at the same time he said, "The more you censor someone, the more young people follow them." Democrats, meanwhile, say Republican defense of free speech is selective, arguing Trump attempted to censor late-night comedians by saying they should be fired for mocking him, is suing media companies and cracking down on student protesters here on visas who have green cards. At the Turning Point conference, several people in the audience said the onstage tensions made them feel the absence of Kirk more profoundly, given that one of his talents was convening a broad universe of conservative influencers and media figures at his events. In opening remarks, Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, said her husband's killing showed how much of a coalition builder he was. Because when he was assassinated, we saw infighting. We've seen fractures. We've seen bridges burning, and that shouldn't be burned. Shapiro's criticism from the Turning Point stage was part of a broader attack on Carlson and other mega media figures, including former Trump advisor Steve Bannon and talk show host Megyn Kelly. On Wednesday, Shapiro argued in a speech at the Heritage Foundation in Washington that Carlson should be exiled from the conservative movement for criticizing free markets, for his indulgent view of President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and his interview with Fuentes, among other actions. In a response to the speech, Carlson texted the Journal that, quote, "makes me laugh. He can talk all he wants, doesn't bother me," end quote. From the Turning Point stage, Shapiro argued that a range of MAGA media stars were undermining the movement by giving voice to fringe figures and conspiracy theories. He criticized popular podcaster Candace Owens, a former Turning Point employee and friend of Kirk's, for raising what he said was absolutely baseless trash about Kirk's killing. Charlie Kirk never took Ben Shapiro seriously, Owens told the Journal through a spokesman in response. Why should anybody else? At the Pentagon, DOGE now shifts to buying drones by Lara Seligman. Washington. The Department of Government Efficiency's mission at the Pentagon now includes not just cutting wasteful programs, but buying thousands of small drones for the U.S. military. Staffers assigned to the Pentagon from the cost-cutting agency formerly run by Elon Musk have been put in charge of sending dollars to U.S. drone makers seeking to spur production of small attack drones, said Travis Metz, who works on the so-called Drone Dominance program. We aim to do a very specific thing, which is to scale the U.S. industrial base to provide one-way attack UAS, said Metz, referring to the unmanned aerial systems. We think if we're successful at that the U.S. industrial base will be much more capable of supplying drones. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth assigned DOGE the mission of catching up to other countries that are using small drones in large numbers on the battlefield, including in Ukraine and the Middle East. The effort, led by Owen West, a Marine veteran and former financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, who is the lead DOGE staffer at the Pentagon, bypasses the department's often cumbersome acquisition system, using $1.1 billion appropriated by Congress to quickly procure drones through a series of competitions, officials said. The aim is to get the drones to military units by 2027. Assigning the mission to DOGE made sense because one of the goals is to bring down the cost of the systems, according to a Pentagon official. In the months after President Trump took office, staffers were embedded at federal agencies, including roughly a dozen at the Defense Department, and tasked with slashing government waste. In April, Hegseth announced that DOGE had saved the department $5.1 billion by cutting IT and consulting contracts. DOGE featured prominently in the early days of Trump's second term, but became a political headache for the White House after it failed to achieve the savings promised by Musk. DOGE said last summer it had saved $190 billion through a combination of asset sales, contract cancellations, job cuts, and other moves. Budget experts across the political spectrum question that claim. When Hegseth launched the initiative in July, he appeared in a video on the Pentagon front lawn, flanked by 4 Marines flying small drones. He plucked a memo authorizing the program from a drone buzzing above him and signed it. The Pentagon this month invited 25 vendors to an event planned for February where operators from the Marine Corps, Army, and Special Operations Command will test and evaluate systems. The operators will choose as many as a dozen companies that will each be awarded a contract to supply at least 1,000 drones deliverable within 5 months, according to a Defense Department notice to companies. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Navy announces new warship for Trump's Golden Fleet by Marcus Weisgerberger and Laura Seligman. The U.S. Navy will commission a new class of frigates, the first in a series of warships that will make President Trump's envisioned, quote, Golden Fleet. The Navy chose HII Ingalls Shipbuilding to build the new ship, it announced Friday in a video posted on social media. The new ship will be based on the Coast Guard's Legend-class national security cutter, which Ingalls builds in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and will replace the Constellation-class frigate that the Navy canceled last month after years of delays. Recent operations from the Red Sea to the Caribbean make the requirement undeniable. Our small surface combatant inventory is a third of what we need, Admiral Daryl Caudle, the Chief of Naval Operations, said in the video. We need more capable blue water, small combatants to close the gap and keep our destroyers focused on the high-end fight. While HII will build the lead ship, the Navy plans to complete the construction of additional vessels at other shipyards so that they can get into the fleet faster. Navy Secretary John Fellon said in a video, the Navy wants the first ship in the water by 2028. We know this frigate design works. We know it operates with the fleet. And most importantly, we know how to build it now, he said. Trump has been personally involved in drawing up plans for the new fleet, which will be designed to better counter China and other threats. The president approved the Navy's plan for the Golden Fleet in the December 3rd Oval Office meeting with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Fellon, and Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Fellon told the Wall Street Journal on the sidelines of the Reagan National Defense Forum earlier this month. A new frigate will be a key piece of that fleet, tasked with protecting larger vessels and sea lanes from threats like enemy aircraft and surface ships. The canceled Constellation class was designed as a multi-mission guided missile frigate that could keep pace with aircraft carriers. During the original competition, which was announced in 2020, HII had proposed a modified version of the cutter for which would become the Constellation class. The frigate will follow the same proven approach we use with the Arleigh Burke destroyers, building it smart from the start, then upgrading it in steps over time, Fellon said in the social media post announcing the new ship. The Constellation-class frigate, which Trump approved in his first term, was being built by Fincantieri in Wisconsin and was supposed to be 85% in common with the Franco-Italian multi-mission frigate it already builds in Europe. The ship was just 15% in common, Vought said at the Reagan National Defense Forum, due to design changes made by the Navy. It has spent about $2 billion on the program so far and will take delivery of just the first 2 ships. American shipbuilders have struggled to produce vessels on time and budget due to a shortage of skilled workers, supply chain issues, and aging facilities. HII, the U.S. Navy's largest shipbuilder, touted a $1 billion investment in its infrastructure, tooling, and facilities at Ingalls in a press release. The company said it has the necessary workers to staff the new program and that it is confident it would be able to launch the first ship in 2028. It plans to begin work as soon as the contract is formally awarded and parts material becomes available. Neither the value of the contract to HII nor the cost of the overall program has been announced. Speed matters, and the national security cutter ship design is stable and producible and will lead to predictable schedules, HII President and Chief Executive Chris Kastner said. HII also said it has created partnerships with international manufacturers and is looking for other ways to increase output. We are currently in discussions with our international shipbuilding partners to explore a joint venture that would significantly expand shipbuilding capacity in support of the future fleet, a company spokesman said. This would include outsourcing support to HII's current programs as well as potentially serving as the second frigate's shipyard. The Golden Fleet will also include at least 49 new support ships, which the Navy will ask for in the budget request next year, Phelan said. Turning to world news, Putin tries to rally support. During annual call-in, Russian president claims gains along Ukrainian front line by Thomas Grove. And there's a picture here of Vladimir Putin raising his hand as he speaks in a microphone clipped to the lapel of his jacket. And the caption reads, Vladimir Putin held a 4.5-hour news conference Friday taking questions from Russian citizens. Vladimir Putin used his annual end-of-year question and answer session to rally the Russian people behind continuing the war in Ukraine while setting out Moscow's red lines and President Trump's peace process. The tightly choreographed back and forth between Russian president and average citizens comes as talks continue on finding a path to end the conflict, and the event was heavily focused on Ukraine. At one point, Putin invited a military commander to describe progress as the conflict approaches its fourth year and said the momentum on the battlefield lies solidly with Russia's forces. The initiative, fully and wholly, the strategic initiative has swung behind the Russian Federation, Putin said. This means that our troops are advancing along the entire front line, in some places more quickly. In reality, Ukraine is continuing to put up a robust defense, and Russia increasingly is using U.S.-brokered peace talks to extract a wider range of concessions from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Putin made a point of thanking Trump for attempts to end the bloodshed and acknowledged that Kiev is giving signals that it was more ready for dialogue than it had been. Trump's special representative, Steve Witkoff, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, visited Moscow this month to talk to Putin before meeting European leaders and Zelensky in Berlin this past week. Trump has said he wants a deal signed by the holidays. European leaders are wary of the terms of any potential agreement. To keep Ukraine solvent in fighting, European leaders agreed early Friday to give Ukraine a $105 billion loan that will fund two-thirds of its budget and military costs over the next 2 years. The ball is completely in the court of our Western opponents, let's say, most of the leaders of the Kiev regime, and in this case, their European sponsors, said Putin. He said the Russian military recruited more than 400,000 soldiers through 2025, and that 700,000 soldiers are serving in the war. Putin's call-in provides a snapshot of issues average Russians care about most, which this year include inflation, electrical outages in the Arctic, and social benefits for the working parents. Many questions reflected how Russia's economy is feeling the strain after years of Western sanctions. Until recently, high oil prices and massive military spending kept it relatively robust. But as labor shortages, high interest rates, and costly fiscal squeeze begin to bite, growth is sputtering. The International Monetary Fund projects anemic growth of just 0.6% this year and roughly 1% next year. By opening himself up to carefully managed scrutiny, Putin can maintain his image as a benevolent leader concerned with the well-being of all Russia's citizens across its 11 time zones. The call-in, which lasted 4.5 hours, also has been used to humanize a leader better known in the West for his gruff outbursts and cold demeanor. Moderators asked him if he had any real friends or sent video messages to his grandchildren. The answers were yes and no. Europe shows fear by not tapping Moscow's assets, by Lawrence Norman and Daniel Michaels, Brussels. European leaders trying to help Ukraine stand up against Russia blinked. When the leaders failed early Friday in their bid to use Russian assets to fund Kiev's war effort, they displayed once again a split that has riven Ukraine's backers since Russia invaded nearly 4 years ago, over how boldly they are willing to confront Moscow. The result of a high-stakes showdown in Brussels wasn't bad for Ukraine, showing continued solid support for President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine will get the $105 billion loan Europe promised, which will fund two-thirds of its budget and military costs over the next 2 years. In the process, Europe has indefinitely locked up Russian assets to keep them beyond the reach of both the Kremlin and the Trump administration. But not for the first time, Europe demonstrated that when faced with Russian threats and intimidation, the contingent struggled to stand strong. Leaders said grabbing sovereign assets would set a dangerous precedent and that a complex plan prepared by the European Union wasn't foolproof. Similar caution has arisen in Washington and Europe throughout the war, even as Russia continued to attack Ukraine, launched a wave of gray zone aggression in Europe, and seized European and U.S. assets stuck in Russia. Western backers repeatedly hesitated to send advanced military equipment to Ukraine over fears of escalating the conflict. They have rebuked Kiev for the strikes deep inside Russia, even as Moscow bombarded Ukraine with impunity. They have imposed wide sanctions, including on Russian oil and gas, but not enforced them in a way that could have brought on confrontation with Moscow or worsened a trade war with China. Now, $250 billion in Russian assets frozen in the first days after the February 2022 Ukraine invasion likely will sit on the sidelines until the war ends, potentially available for Ukraine's recovery, but not to bolster Kiev's military or Europe's rearmament efforts. Europe's plan to employ Russian assets for the Ukraine loan was scuttled by opposition from Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever. Belgium worried that a successful legal challenge to the loan could leave the country in a financial crisis. That is because Belgium houses Euroclear, which held about two-thirds of the $300 billion in Russian central bank assets at the war's start. De Wever said Moscow threatened legal and financial retaliation against Belgium and him personally if the government backed using Russian assets for the loan. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the plan would have had serious consequences, foremost among them an erosion of trust in the EU as a safe home for financial assets. The loan came close to being a multi-pronged weapon. EU officials, starting with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and national leaders, including German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, wanted to impound 90 billion euro as essentially collateral for the Ukraine loan. That would have helped Kiev while punishing Russia and lightening the EU's financial burden. Instead, EU taxpayers are on the hook for the cost of the loan. Merz called the fallback decision, an interest-free 90 billion euro loan for Kiev funded by a joint European bond, a pragmatic good solution that achieves the same thing. Europe strengthened Kiev's hand in continuing U.S.-led talks. The loan ensures Ukraine will be funded for 2 years instead of just another quarter. Zelensky thanked the EU, saying on X that the loan truly strengthens our resilience. But while Ukraine got what it needed, which is ultimately what mattered to officials in Brussels, the EU emerged bruised. The outcome shows how difficult it is to get political support to extend to covering costs among European countries, said Mark Bathgate, chief executive of Tweeddale Advisors, a political consultant in London for investment firms. That difficulty is likely to grow, EU leaders fear. Belgium was joined in its opposition by Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. Italy, Bulgaria, and Malta also voiced doubts. I'd like to take a moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Turning to the opinion section, what was Susie Wiles thinking? By Peggy Noonan, Declarations. President Trump's address to the nation Wednesday evening was bracing and, as such things go, revealing. As is often the case with Mr. Trump, there was text and subtext, the sparkling surface, and below deeper currents that tugged this listener's thoughts toward the more fundamental meaning of Mr. Trump's efforts, and a realization once again that with this president, one is in the hands not of a mere magician, but a master. Ha! Just kidding. The ghost of Walter Lippmann, leaning into the wireless to hear FDR, stole into me. Why should only AI get to hallucinate? Why can't I have Franklin Roosevelt? As a piece of work, Mr. Trump's speech was blunt and blubbery, didn't persuade but only asserted, and not in a winning way. It was propaganda that didn't bother to make believe it wasn't propaganda, which always feels like an insult. His mouth moved oddly, as if he were mad at his words. 1 year ago, our country was dead. 11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I am fixing it. I was elected in a landslide. He's in good shape because he beats so many dead horses. It keeps the arms and shoulders up. I liked Good Evening, America because it was new, Trumpian. Why talk to your fellow citizens when you can talk to a continent? And sound like the name of a bouncy new television show, which I'm sure it will soon be. If you liked him, you liked it. If not, you didn't. But he did nothing to draw you into his way of thinking, bring you along, increase your confidence, kindle a little faith. So, a missed opportunity. Here, I mentioned that it would be nice if presidents returned to making national addresses from the big desk in the Oval Office. A full generation of White House advisors decided that image was static and inert, that a president looks more dynamic if he's standing, with long halls or mantles behind him. It doesn't look dynamic, it looks tentative, as if he's afraid to settle into a line of thought. He looks as if he just strolled by and bumped into a podium. Men at desks are committing to a conversation. A brave president, probably a woman, will someday go back to the resolute, sit and share her thinking. Mr. Trump is charged with seeming detached from the citizenry's experience of inflation. His recent and most persuasive critic, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, reminds us he is a billionaire. Nothing showed the distance between Mr. Trump and regular Americans like the Journal's report this week on the degree to which the president and his family have prospered financially since he re-entered office. David Uberti, Juanja Gomez, and Cara Dapina reported the Trump family has enjoyed a major expansion of its vast array of business interests in crypto, communications, and financial products, added to its older holdings in real estate and golf courses. The Trump Organization has launched a host of new ventures and products from meme coins to data centers. Wealth insulates. The wealthy know this and try to compensate in everything from their philanthropy to visiting grocery stores now and then to learn the price of ground chuck. Voters, including Mr. Trump's supporters, look at him, know it insulates him, and wonder exactly how such significant new wealth has attached itself to him and his family, how exactly that works, what exactly got traded, whether or not that's all fully right. Financially, the most vivid communications burst from the Trump White House came this week, from the long-formed profile of the previously silent White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles in Vanity Fair. It's a Lollapalooza. A scoop's a scoop, a story's a story, none can decry it. She had her reasons for sitting down with former 60 Minutes and cable news producer Christopher Whipple, who has written a book on presidential chiefs of staff, but nobody knows what they were. Her essential judgments on persons and events are, as quoted, make her look wise and perceptive, which is her general reputation, but she was also indiscreet. Other staffers and officials cooperated in the spread. The minute I saw it, I thought, they think they're going to get the positive treatment that George W. Bush White House got in a cover story in Vanity Fair in 2002. Rich, handsome photos, no embarrassing quotes. But that was just after 9/11 and before Iraq. America needed a lift. Attractive young Mr. Bush, Condi Rice's star power, all reliables Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld. It was another world. My guess is that Miss Wiles took part because she wanted to be understood, which is almost always a mistake in public life. You've got to have a harder, meaner objective than that, and wanted the White House understood, a nobler objective but one that wasn't going to happen. Vanity Fair does not exist to understand Donald Trump. The accompanying photo portraits are mostly hideous. In Miss Wiles' case, also ill-mannered and unkind. She is the first woman to be a White House Chief of Staff, a lady of a certain age and accomplishment who swims in the highest of high seas. She is presented as bug-eyed and insane, as Mrs. Lovett asking if you wouldn't like another piece of pie. Nice people hate it when Mr. Trump shows no class. They ought to feel it when his foes show none. Miss Wiles seems, in the piece, to have been allowed, perhaps even encouraged, to view her interlocutor as her friend, her jolly confidant. She talks to him while doing the wash. This reminded me of some stinging words among the most famous ever written about journalism by a journalist herself. Quote, every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse. That is Janet Malcolm from her book, The Journalist and the Murderer. She was one of the great, singular, unflinching writers of her generation, which included Joan Didion, in relation to whom she had an equal or superior level of talent without the promotional ability. Malcolm wasn't damning her profession, but admitting its members place themselves in moral peril, cultivating an atmosphere of intimacy with the subject, for instance, and then treating the material roughly. The subject is left on publication humiliated. Malcolm thought journalists must proceed with humility and an awareness of the central fact of what they're doing. Mr. Whipple, in his media victory lap, told CNN's Anderson Cooper that normally when he's spoken to former chiefs of staff, they've toggled between the background, off the record and on. Miss Wiles didn't, he said. He seemed almost to giggle, but stopped himself. Practical, if cynical, advice to future White House staffers: if you're going to do a series of interviews in which you share plain-spoken thoughts and views, do it with a writer working the beat who will continue to need you as a source, someone whose flourishing depends to some degree on your goodwill. You need them basting you like a turkey in the oven, not carving you up on the cutting board. And we'll end with this opinion piece. Lessons from Modern Parenthood by Rahm Emanuel. Every year I insist that each of my 3 children select a book for us to read together. Begrudging the assignment, my daughter Ilana spent the summer before college exploiting my love of the past by insisting we read Larry Flint's One Nation Under Sex, How the Private Lives of Presidents, First Ladies, and Their Lovers Changed the Course of American History, 2011. I ended up learning a great deal. In Flint's account, which some historians dispute, not only was James Buchanan gay, but before becoming president, he engaged in a fairly open affair in 1856 with a senator from Alabama. Better yet, I gained from Ilana's choice some unexpected leverage. By revealing her ploy to all her many friends in this article, I am, years later, teaching her a lesson I once feared she might never learn. Revenge is a dish best served cold. I understood why Ilana resented the assignment. I too had bristled with my parents insisted I read. I chose to maintain the tradition because I'd come to appreciate Mark Twain's aphorism. Quote, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. End quote. While raising my own kids, Amy and I saw our parents' wisdom crystallized. Rather than trying never to repeat their mistakes, we worked to emulate the madness of their methods. I am one of 3 brothers who each made an impact in their fields. I'm now the father of 3 grown children who are poised to outdo their parents. Zach, 28, joined the Navy as an intel officer after college and is now a lieutenant. Ilana, 27, joined the Navy Reserve after completing her bachelor's degree and is on track to earn a joint law and business degree. Leah, 25, works as a consultant to government agencies and companies at the intersection of national security and climate change. The question I'm asked most frequently, more often even than what was the hardest thing about being mayor of Chicago or White House chief of staff, is how the Emanuel family does it. There's no secret sauce. Amy and I were as frightened as any new couple when we had our first child, looking at each other wondering how we were going to keep this fragile little creature alive. But rearing children is like a long baseball season suffused with an endless series of balls, strikes, hits, and misses. Even the best pitchers give up a grand slam from time to time, and a winning record requires a constant attention and adjustment. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers, and we've made all our share of mistakes. or made our share of mistakes. But informed by our parents' wisdom and example, we developed a few guiding principles. Now that we're through the wind tunnel of adolescence, I'm happy to share them. Our first principle, perhaps the most important, is a tribute to my Jewish mother. Meals matter. If you want to raise success, no matter my job, Amy and I made it a practice to carve out at least 4 evenings a week for dinner. Knowing that Shabbat dinners often run long, President Obama would sometimes text me late on Friday nights. Is it safe to call yet? I wasn't only insisting on time alone with Amy and the kids. Amy and I were signaling to the kids how important they were to us and how important the Shabbat meal was to our family. During my childhood, my mother insisted that our family convene at a circular table without a head so that everyone would feel an equal right to speak and be heard. It was never easy to get a word in edgewise, and there was nothing safe about that space. Say anything half stupid and everyone would pile on for the next 25 years. But my parents believed that open debate was the best way for us to learn and gain confidence. Amy and I continued that tradition with one update. We banished screens from the table. The point was to interact even if you were too young to talk or too much of a teenager to care what your moron parents had to say. The meals paid a dividend. Second, the debate about the quantity versus the quality of time we spend with our kids is bunk, to use the cleaned up version of a word my mother liked. What matters is how present you are in your kids' lives. When the children were young, Amy noticed that I was often on the phone when I walked in the door. She demanded that I finish the call on the porch so that when I walked in, I could immediately focus on the children. When we went away in the summer, we didn't have television, computers, or the internet service. Did the kids want to read books or play Scrabble with their parents all afternoon? Nope. Did they have a vote? They didn't. Zach once complained that we weren't a real family because we didn't watch sitcoms together. Oh, the horror. But family dynamics aren't only about the group as a whole. On evenings when one kid was studying for a big test, Amy or I would sit and read in the child's room, making it easier to ask an uncomfortable question in a pinch. We'd also make sure to do things out of the house on a one-on-one basis so that my decisions about, say, where to eat couldn't be appealed to the Supreme Court, aka Mom. Every one-on-one relationship within the family is important, but as the father of 2 daughters, I'm convinced that when it comes to a woman's sense of self, few things are more important than the connection she forged as an adolescent with her father. Third, every parent should abide by an admonition frequently offered by my famous pediatrician father. I never met a child spoiled for having been told too many times that they were loved. Parental love is the foundation from which any child can comfortably and confidently take risks. Amy and I have never shied from telling our kids we love them, early, often, and frequently, in ways that embarrass them in front of their peers. At the same time, we believe that setting low expectations or neglecting to acknowledge their failures and setbacks isn't love at all. My parents made a habit of posting our report cards on the refrigerator door. That drove me crazy as a kid, and not only because Zeke, the eldest, occasionally got better grades, nerd that he was, but the realization that anyone who came through the back door would know how we'd scored in the previous academic quarter meant that no one could doubt what my parents expected of us. Being supportive and demanding are a yin and yang. Children need both from their parents to succeed. Rather than broadcasting our kids' report cards, Amy and I established a different tradition. A child who did something particularly noteworthy in school any given week earned the privilege of eating off the star plate on Shabbat and was offered the opportunity to invite a friend's family for dinner. This was considered an honor, but Amy and I had an additional motive. We believed we would glean more from observing the friends they selected than we would from scouring their backpacks. To be sure, kids behave differently at formal dinners than they do in the wild, especially dinner at the mayor's house. But the crowd your child chooses is what my father termed a tell about moral character. Fourth, families need to nurture every child's interests. Set aside all the academic debates about how many words a young child should hear. Parents' job is to expose their kids to stimuli that expands their thinking. In the last months of each of Amy's pregnancies, we made sure to turn the radio up a little louder. When I walked the kids through the neighborhood on my chest, I faced them out so they could see the world. We regularly took our toddlers to the park so they could build confidence at the jungle gyms, and we took our teenagers to visit the city's cultural attractions. Through all the years, we made a habit of reading them good old-fashioned books. Schools can still fill in some of the gaps that come from a childhood spent staring at screens, but we can't expect even the best teachers to make up for all the things that can be nurtured by parents only. Home is where children learn to appreciate an education. If they don't, they'll never get the education any given school has to offer. Only 20% of a child's time is spent in the classroom, which means that parents' job is to invest the remaining 80%. There's no great secret to being a great.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,